Hello, I am about to bring you a guest conversation that you never even knew you needed to hear. I know this can be a sensitive topic that we're about to talk about, but as are many things that we deal with in the world of high school counseling. This is one of those hard topics to hear about that lead other people to wonder how in the world we show up as high school counselors day in and day out to work with really hard and heavy and sensitive things. My guest today has been working to eradicate sex trafficking as she's been a volunteer with a local organization that fights to educate around this issue. Krystal Nierman leads the prevention team at Switch, a nonprofit organization local to Greenville, South Carolina, which fights to end sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. Krystal and I connected in person, and I met her and heard about the work she was doing, and I knew she had to be on the podcast. Krystal is a member of the South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force. She's a wife and a mother of 4 kids who has actively been involved in fighting trafficking and exploitation for the last 6 years. You're about to learn all about the prevention of sex trafficking, including how to spot it happening with our students and what to do when you suspect it. Krystal connects us to some very valuable resources, so let's listen in to this week's interview.
You got into this profession to make a difference in your students' lives, but you're spread thin by all of the things that keep getting added to your to-do list. I can't create more hours in the day, but I can invite you into my Counselor Click, where you'll finally catch your breath. Come with me as we unpack creative ideas and effective strategies that'll help you be the counselor who leaves a lifelong impact on your students. I'm Lauren Tingle, your high school counseling hype girl, here to help you energize your school counseling program and remind you of how much you love your job.
Well, let's dive right in. Hi, Krystal. Welcome to the High School Counseling Conversations podcast. I'm so excited to have you here and to talk about your topic, which is really important for counselors and really everyone to hear about.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm so excited to be here and share this information with you all.
Yeah, you work for a nonprofit called Switch. Will you tell us a little bit about the organization and what the goal of it is overall?
Sure. So Switch was a nonprofit that was founded in 2012. With its main purpose to help eradicate trafficking and sexual exploitation here in the upstate of South Carolina. And so that's like the Greenville, South Carolina area. And so we do that through 5 different programs. So prevention, which is what we're going to be talking about primarily today, more of what to look for and how to protect the youth that are vulnerable to this. Awareness is where we go out and we talk to adults in the community and we share things like what trafficking actually looks like, the true identity of trafficking. And it's very different than what the media often portrays in movies and even the news. And it's just a lack of knowledge. So just showing that truth about it. Demand, which is what my husband actually leads at Switch. And that's where he goes out and talks to groups of men and just talks about how men can help be the leaders to help eradicate the demand to buy sex. If there was no demand to buy sex, there would be no reason to traffic or exploit individuals. And then intervention. We know trafficking is happening in our area. So we go out and we meet the vulnerable populations where they are, and we just love them. We just show them that agape love of no strings attached. We're here because you are a human being and you're valuable and you have worth. And we just want to shower you with that love that you probably don't get like you deserve. And so our goal is to show them the sincerity of our actions so that if they feel like they are ready to get out of the life, we can be there to help hold their hand and kind of walk them through that process. And I think it might have been with FBI or Homeland Security at one of the presentations I was at by them. But she said, we don't rescue trafficked persons. Trafficked persons rescue themselves, and we're just there to help them. And I just thought that was so powerful and true to this particular crime. And then the last but not least, it's one of our biggest spines, if you will, at Switch is for those, we call them our participants, but for those individuals who are leaving the life of trafficking, it can be very jarring to kind of flip that switch and start a different life. And so we help them with things like counseling, obviously very, lots of trauma had happened to them. So having trauma-informed counseling to help walk them through that, to expunge their records. People that are trafficked are forced to do things that are illegal, that are crimes that they don't want to do, but they don't really have a choice. And so we can expunge those records that they might have that will help them actually have a better future. How to, get an apartment or a house, how to get a job, and just the legality of expunging the records and that holistic approach of counseling, all of that together is what we offer our participants. And it's just a very, very valuable piece of the puzzle that's missing. If you look at the national statistics for trafficking, the recidivism rate of those individuals who are getting out of trafficking, but then go back into it. And this was pre-COVID. So the numbers might have changed since then, but it was 72% of trafficked persons go back into the life. And that was just like broke my heart again. But at Switch, for our participants, it was like between 20 and 30%. I want to say it was like 27 or 28% recidivism rate, which is just a very powerful, staggering difference between those two. So that is what our restoration program is. That is our fifth leg, if you will, on how we actively work with our community to help eliminate trafficking and exploitation.
Krystal, that is incredible. Like, you are speaking these counselors' language who are listening to this right now. And I just think Switch does an amazing job at starting from the beginning, like you said, with that proactive education piece to everyone who's involved, whether it's youth and young people who are vulnerable to get into this, to men who you said are in charge of the demand basically for this, to at the tail end of getting them out and like helping them. And I love what you said. It's such a valid point of like, we're here for when you're ready to come out. Like, that has to be your decision, with anything. The youth that we're working with, like, if we want to see change, then that has to come from within first, or some sort of internal motivation to make a change. And so it is so encouraging to me that your services are out there to holistically, like you said, reach this really vulnerable population. Let me pause because I bet there are people wondering this. You're in the upstate of South Carolina. Are there organizations like you in other places? Are there more Switch organizations, or are there other people who are doing things like this other places in the country?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So Switch is specific to the upstate of South Carolina, but there are many, many for-profit and nonprofit organizations throughout the country, in every state, and I shouldn't say every county. I don't know about that, but in every state, they're there. We wish there was more. And the reality is that last year at the NACOSI CC Summit, so NACOSI is the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, and their CC Summit happens every year. It's the Coalition to End Sexual Exploitation, and trafficking would actually fall under exploitation. It's a type of exploitation. And so they said that the sad reality is, with all of these organizations throughout the country, if we were to pull everybody out of trafficking who is being trafficked right now, we wouldn't have anywhere to put them. And so there are organizations out there. We need more. We need more awareness. We need more people to be properly aware of trafficking, of what it really looks like. And it's one of those things that, when you're shopping for a new car and you pick this car and you think, wow, this is a really unique car. I don't see many of these. And then you buy it and you see them all the time and you're like, dang it. Right? Trafficking's very much like that, where before I was aware of Switch, before I really knew what trafficking looked like, not like the movie Taken, I didn't think it really happened in the US at all. And now that my eyes are open and I see what trafficking looks like, which is why our organization is called Switch, right? We're switching the light on trafficking. We're showing that true reality of trafficking. I can just engage with people and just see people and just have this feeling of, I suspect that this person's experiencing some sort of exploitation or trafficking. And so, yes, there are many organizations throughout the United States. If you Google anti-trafficking efforts in your area, I'm sure you will find something. And then if not in your area, try the next county over. So we cover the upstate. So it's not just the city of Greenville, but all of the surrounding counties around us. So
yeah, we'll give them the link, obviously, for your organization when we're done with this in the show notes. But if what they're hearing sounds interesting or they want to further their education on it, your website would be a great place to start. And then they can kind of broaden out from there, because people are going to listen to this all over the place. I love that you said kind of what we're going to get into. You're just leading us into the next question of things that we want to be on the lookout for when it comes to sex trafficking, because people might have some preconceived notions, or like you said, it doesn't happen around me. This is not something that's that common, but maybe we just don't know what to look for. So when we are working with high school age students, what are some warning signs that we could be looking for? What do we need to be on the lookout for as indicators that there could be sex trafficking happening with our students or around our school or in our city?
Yeah, before I answer that question, do you think that your listeners are familiar with what trafficking actually looks like? Should we start there?
Yeah, start there. Let's
and
start
then
there.
we'll answer that question.
Yep.
Okay. So they kind of go hand in hand. And that's why I wanted to clarify, because my preconceived notions was, it only happened internationally. It was only, the Russians that were kidnapping rich white girls. And that's not me. So I'm safe, and so that is not what it looks like. And the sad truth is that trafficking happens within the home. Most people think it happens outside of the home in a dangerous place. But if a child has a internet access and a Chromebook or a cell phone or an iPad, they're exposed to predators who are looking to exploit them or traffic them. And it's right out of their bedroom. And there are so many heartbreaking stories of, children and teens and young adults who literally are sleeping at home with mom and or dad at home, seemingly have the picturesque, perfect lifestyle. And they're sneaking out of their room in the middle of the night to be picked up by somebody to then be trafficked and then brought back home before everybody wakes up so they can get a few hours of rest before they go back into school. And so there has been several survivor stories where it's happening under mom and dad's nose and they had no idea. But then there's also the sad reality that, trafficking, it's either 1 out of 3 or 2 out of 3. And let's just go with the lesser number. 1 out of 3 runaways are approached by a trafficker within 72 hours.
Wow.
That's too many.
Yeah.
Right. I'm pretty sure it's 2 out of 3, but I'm not 100% right now. But that is just astounding to me that the evil knowledge, the evil genius out there of 1 out of 3 runaways are going to be contacted by a trafficker within the first few days of leaving home. And that trafficker is going to say, hey, do you need a safe place to stay? Do you need somebody to protect you? That child's probably running away for a reason, right?
And we all know students who have run away. Like that is a
Yes.
very common thing, whether it's, for valid reasons, like their home doesn't feel safe or they don't like the rules in their home. Like we all know students who are leaving home and looking for an alternative.
And that trafficker is going to promise every hope and dream that individual thinks they want. And they're going to do it in a way that, for the first few weeks, it sounds like this is the perfect life. And then they're going to use that. I call it I don't call it, it's called the art of reciprocity, right? If somebody gives you something, by instinct, you want to give something back. And so however it's happening, the trafficker's going to say, hey, I've been supporting you for the last few weeks. I gave you a safe place to be. I let you stay out as late as you want. I let you hang out with your friends, although they are going to start to insert themselves between those friend relationships, right? They're going to start to isolate very slowly. But they'll say this. They'll say, I let you hang out with your friends because they let them like one time. And now I'm getting, I'm a little tight. It's hard to cover rent this month. So I just need you to do me this favor, right? And then once they can get them to do it once, they can get them to do it again and again and again. And then the sad reality is specifically here in the upstate, or not just the upstate, in South Carolina, in the state of South Carolina, we are most known for familial trafficking. And this is where children are being trafficked by mom or dad, whether mom or dad's a biological figure or not, but they are being trafficked by the protector of their home. And when I first joined Switch, my kids are still young, but they were younger then. And it just wrecked me. Like, how could a mom or a dad, but a mom couldn't, right? Like maybe it's a dad. How could a dad do this? And then, I started learning more about Switch and trafficking. And I realized that it's usually mom is equally, if not more so involved in trafficking of their own child. And so it's a generational problem. But then when I hear from these survivors, they just said, I wish somebody would ask more questions. Like they're taught what to say, but they're not necessarily like taught all of the answers, right?
Right. I think as counselors, like we're usually willing to step into those hard conversations, but I could imagine at home feeling like, your teenager shuts you down and then, we've all dealt with moody, angsty teenagers before. It's like, okay, well, I guess it must be nothing because they don't want to talk about it or they've had a hard day. Like as a parent, you probably need to hear things like keep pressing in and keep asking those questions. But I'm glad we're talking about this to counselors because it could be like a really sensitive topic. They could feel like, well, maybe this isn't my place to ask these questions, even though we're not always afraid to ask them. But maybe if we don't know about it or what to ask for or look for, then I just think that this conversation is going to serve the listeners really well.
Right. And your audience is definitely going to be more geared and in tuned with reading between the lines than just a mom or a dad. It is reading between those lines. And there was one survivor of familial trafficking who every day she said it was almost every day she got dropped off at the bus stop, a new man was picking her up. And she was taught to tell the bus driver it was her uncle from out of town. And she said if one bus driver would have just said more than just like, who is that? But like, where's your uncle from? Or does he have any kids? Or how long is he staying? And yes, he's a bus driver. He's dropping off. He's got to get to his next setting. But like at some point, a bus driver has to be like, how many uncles do you have?
Right.
And so just asking more questions, not interrogating, but just caring, right?
Yes.
So that's kind of how trafficking happens, right? So the trafficker oftentimes is not going to kidnap. I mean, that's very rare. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but it's very rare. They're going to, I like to say, emotionally kidnap, right? They create that emotional bondage where they start these relationships on social media, online, and then they, say, hey, let's meet, and they meet somewhere safe, like a pizza or coffee shop, and they just start this relationship so that they can convince the child to run away, or they can traffic the child right out of their home. So in a nutshell, that is kind of what trafficking looks like. So as a school counselor, like what would you guys see, or what would you look for? And one of my favorite people to follow was Janine Driver, and she is what was known as the human lie detector. And so CIA, ATF, I think maybe FBI, like they have all used her in interrogations, and she reads body language. And what I had gathered from her, because my business name is Dog Psychology and Training Center. I love psychology. I follow psychology a lot. And so she said what she picks up on is a deviation from the normal, right? And some people will say, well, if somebody's lying, they're not going to make eye contact. They're going to divert their eyes. And then other people will be like, no, like if somebody's a really good liar, they're going to make direct eye contact. She says, whatever, you have to watch them and they're normal and then see when they start to deviate. And that's how you can tell if somebody's lying. And I feel like that's very similar to trafficking. If a child has signs of physical abuse, burn marks, bruises, things like that, that's not necessarily just a red flag of trafficking, right? That could be neglect or abuse in the home. That's still something to be concerned about. But when you see a combination of these, then I'll go through the list and there's more, but I'll go through like the basics, the most common that we see. But like if you see a combination of these or such a deviation from the norm, even if it's just one red flag, but it's like, wow, that individual was not like that a couple of weeks ago, or even a couple months ago, or even last school year. And they're just so different. And yes, maturity,
But a lot of these counselors are following their students for many years. And like, yeah, you might not know them that well their freshman year, but you kind of know like what's normal for them, or if you've had their siblings or their teachers know what to look for. So this is right on track. Like they're going to understand and they're going to know what you're talking about.
Okay, good. So main red flags that we commonly see are going to be that withdrawn behavior, a child who's pulling into themselves, maybe distancing them from themselves from their friend groups, or starting to have older friend groups that are outside of the school, like they're meeting up with, or they're always talking about this other friend that's older. Unexplained absences from school, or maybe sleeping through classes, especially those early period classes, like they're working at night, right? They're not getting enough rest. And I was an insomniac in school, so I did not sleep very well, but I also loved school. So I never slept in class. That would be not me. I was a teacher's pet. But like I get that staying up late and that tiredness throughout the day. So that sudden tiredness, right? Like somebody who's just really was maybe a active student, a participating student, or maybe not, but just all of a sudden sleeping a lot, disengaged, not answering questions, maybe less appropriately dressed than normal. And again, we're talking about like that middle school, teenage years where they're still trying to become themselves, right? They're still trying to identify, but you notice those drastic changes. There are some friends that I have that just, they can wear outfits that I would never be caught dead in, but they rock it so well, right? They own it. Like that's just not me. I never had that kind of confidence, but I would never say my friends were red flags of trafficking, right? But
if you were dressed as you normally do, and then you go to that extreme, people might have questions.
Exactly. There would be some eyebrows raised. And I think just realizing those subtle changes that can seem very almost commonplace sometimes for this age group, but they don't have to be commonplace, right?
Mm-hmm. Especially like you said, if they're in combination with each other or they're so different from what this student normally is.
Right. And there's always, those gray areas, but these are just signs, right? A combination is more concerning. Maybe a second mobile phone. Like, why does a child need two phones?
Do we need one phone even? We could go on a tangent about that.
Exactly. Let's just get rid of all of them. But kids do get dead phones from their families that nobody's using and give to their other friends whose maybe their parents have more restrictions on their phones. And so they're like, here, you can bypass Snapchat with this phone.
Mm-hmm.
And so kids may have other phones for more innocent, still guilty reasons, but that is a big red flag. And that is a device that a trafficker will give a student so that they can have isolated conversations to know that no adult is going to be having sensors or, protections on. Maybe like a sudden change in emotional health. So maybe they're depressed, maybe they start cutting, maybe they just start to have those emotional or mental health changes that are not normal for that age group. Starts to have a lot of money, right? Like they come in with nice shoes, nice purses, nice clothes, starts talking about having all this extra money or a way that you can make money.
I think I told you this before, but that was one of my experiences with a student where that was the big red flag for me, that I was starting to ask questions about, like, I know your background and it does not involve this sudden influx of money and privilege that you're getting because of this. So it made me ask questions and get a training on this exact thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That is very common. And again, it would be something to be like, we could excuse that. Like maybe they just got a job, maybe they got, and so they're getting this money. Ask questions. That's really all it comes down to, just start to have those conversations. Tattoos, subtle tattoos as well. Traffickers can be very bold and brazen and just put that crown right on the center chest, but they can also do it on the inside of the lip or right behind the ear. And so subtle places like that too, which would be harder to detect. But if you see something like that, those hidden tattoos, I think it's more warranting of questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the tattoos can be very typical, where I would say daddy or crown, the tattoo of the crown. And that's kind of like the trafficker's signature, their branding, or it could just be their name. New tattoos of any kind on a child are going to be like, oh, when did this happen? Because parents have to give consent, right? An adult has to give consent, I should say. We already talked about older friends, but specifically older boyfriends or older girlfriends. It's very wrong. There's no nice way to put it. For a person who is, 19, 20, 25 to be engaging with a 16, 17-year-old girl, that's very concerning. If it's, an 18 or 19-year-old who just graduated a couple years ago, like maybe it is a kosher relationship, but those older boyfriend or girlfriends can definitely start to raise those red flags, especially because that prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed, right? And so it just puts them at a disadvantage, even though they're almost an adult, or even if they are 18 and they are considered legally an adult, but that's 26-year-old guy, well, his prefrontal cortex is developed, yours isn't, right? He's going to use that to manipulate you. And then just disjointed families. Nobody has that perfect home. It's really hard to find that nuclear family nowadays. But even if they have a nuclear family, even if they don't have a nuclear family, you will see changes, right? Whether it's emotional, whether it's tiredness, whether it's bruises or their anxiety level, right? All of these things kind of feed in. So sudden running away, or a youth that they just always ran away. Well, don't write them off, because we know 1 out of 3 or even 2 out of 3 between there, they're going to be approached by a trafficker. So if they're a continuous runaway, which we know many runaways do it again and again and again,
they're going to be more at risk. Yeah,
exactly. And they may already have been contacted by a trafficker. When I go into schools and I start teaching about trafficking and I start showing them what trafficking and exploitation looks like, I'll start to see those hands go up real slowly. Like, hey, I had some creeper, message me and I just blocked them. And I'm like, well, good for you. But like, they have this happen to them all the time. And they're just like, I get sick of blocking them. It just happens so often. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have to deal with that. Like, my life was not like that when I was your age. And I'm so sorry that you have to protect yourself again and again and again. Children that are teenagers that are living with friends, that's concerning. Why are you living with friends? Are you protected there? Are you safe? Is there an adult in charge?
Mm-hmm.
And then those that are just experiencing homelessness. So again, why are you experiencing homelessness? Do you have a safe place to go? Can we make sure that we can find you a teen shelter or a foster home, which I hesitated to say it because I love many foster parents, but we also know those predators who prey on children, put themselves into positions to acquire children. I would definitely follow those channels, but I would definitely stay with that child longer to make sure whatever foster home they get placed in is a good, loving home. which majority are. So I don't want like people to think that, they're bad, but I hear too many stories.
Yeah, I bet you've heard it all, that you have to have like
Yes.
these like be on high alert all the time. And I would say counselors are in a similar position. They hear so many stories. You want to trust your gut and be like, "Oh, I think this is fine," but we know that if we're going to ask questions, it's not going to hurt. I would rather ask the questions and be wrong or refer to the right people who can help and be wrong and have helped someone along the way than not to have done anything. So, I mean, you're saying all of these things that we need to be on the lookout for. I think it's really smart. Can you tell me, I know you do like preventative work in schools with, all students, all backgrounds, all family backgrounds. Are guys or girls are like being more affected by this? It sounds like you're doing the presentations for everyone in the school. So are you seeing more trends in this is like just a girl problem? I don't think so, right?
Not at all. Not at all. So I hear even my own girlfriends who'll be like, "Oh, Krystal, I'm so glad you're working with Switch and making changes. I'm just so glad I have a boy." And I'm like, "What?" No, boys are just as likely to be trafficked as girls. And so it's estimated anywhere between 25 to 45% of victims are male. And so people will say, "Well, why is there such a variation in that? Why don't you just know?" Well, because there's a 20-year disclosure gap for males, right? So females, it's not easy for a female to come forward and say that I was a victim, that I was abused. But we societally make it more difficult for a male to do that. And so from a young age, I have to catch myself with my own son as he's going through hormonal changes. And he's a very emotional boy right now. He's crying all the time. It's like, Raider, go clean your room. And so I have to catch myself and be like, stop crying. Boys don't cry. Because that's not true, right? Like his dad cries more than I do half the time. Like when I gave birth to all of our children, he cried. I didn't. Like it is okay for boys to cry. And we just make it more difficult for them. So I say that to say that trafficking, even though it has been around forever, right? There's hints of it in the Bible. It wasn't really recognized as trafficking until the early 2000s. And so we have 20 years right now. We're kind of at that 20-year cusp where more and more men are finally coming forward and sharing the trafficking instances that they have been going through as children or young adults or young men. And so we're just on the cusp of really getting those statistics. So that's why there's such a variance there. But what I like to look at as a reference for today, what are we dealing with, is going to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And they are really good about posting statistics, although like you mentioned earlier, like they keep putting things in different places. And I'm like, wait, where is that page that had all the statistics?
Right.
But if you hunt around on their page, you will find it. And so they have CSAM, child sexual abuse material. And we'll get into that more in just a second as we talk about sextortion and things like that. But CSAM, child sexual abuse material, is when you say report this video or image as inappropriate because there's a child in it. Some people would call it child pornography, but I refuse to use that term because that implies that children consented to be in pornography. And children under the age of 18 cannot consent to sex, commercial sex, even if they want to. They can't consent to that. It's illegal. It's automatically considered a child trafficking situation. Even if a teenager says, I want to be a porn star, and they decide to do that, you can't. So whoever is buying that or facilitating that for you would also be arrested under child sex trafficking because you just can't do it. So anyways.
Yeah, no, I think that hearing that is like really helpful. Like I think you say it out loud and you're like, well, of course that makes sense. But without the education and without hearing an expert talk about this, we don't know that language behind it, and in your mind, you might think, well, yeah, that of course, if someone brought that up, I would say, I don't think that that's right. But you're telling us black and white.
It is not.
It is illegal. Okay.
And it kind of goes back to, I don't know if you guys or your followers have followed that Jeffrey Epstein case and Ghislaine Maxwell, but I was obsessed with it. The quick turnout from, like having somebody at your school say, hey, do you want to make a quick couple $100 to showing up at this mansion and walking into the house and allowing, I say allowing in quotes because we'll get to,
what is allowed, what's legal. Right.
And so, allowing that abuse to happen, there was so much grooming that happened from that person I met at school to that fancy car ride because they would get picked up. They don't have cars. They're not even old enough to drive, right? So they'd get picked up in a fancy car, drove to this mansion far away from their home, right? So now we're isolating you. We're having you in this fancy car. So you're already thinking, wow, this person has a lot of money. And then you show up to this mansion, you think, oh, this person doesn't just have money, like they have a lot of money. And then you start walking through this house and you see pictures of this person with past presidents and famous people. And you think, wow, he doesn't just have money, he has power, right? And then you go up to the room to give the massage. And then he asks you to do something else than what you were anticipating. And you say, okay, you didn't allow that, young person. You were coerced and manipulated to be put into a situation to be abused. And that's why I said I'll come back to that aloud, because it gives me goosebumps every time I talk about it. I get so angry. You did not allow that. And that was like the trauma that those victims really struggled with for the majority of their lives for multitude of reasons, because the law did not favor their side, right? Law enforcement allowed this to happen. FBI allowed this to happen. Attorney General's office allowed this to happen. And they were called child prostitutes. And so they thought, I chose that. I made that choice. I knew it was weird. And so it was my fault.
And they get this label put on them, and then they don't want to come forward because they're not recognizing it as abuse or trauma.
Right. And there's so much more to that case that I could go on forever. So I'm just going to wrap it up there. But I say, like at the beginning when I said, media, even the news don't get it right. Like the news is actually what labeled those victims child prostitutes in that original case of Jeffrey Epstein back in like the early, was it 2004, 2006? I don't know. It was between there and 2011. But they labeled them that. And I was like, oh, you guys just don't know. That's not even a legal, like the legally can't even be, but you just don't know what you don't know. So anyways, moving forward. All CSAM material, child sexual abuse or child pornography material, gets reported to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And on their website, they break it down by the percentage of male versus female victims. And on their website, it was like 43%, I believe. And this was not last year, but the year before, so 2022. And I was just like, that to me is a more accurate representation of the percent of males that are possibly trafficked right now. So yes, this is a boy and girl problem.
Right. Like to me, you're saying doesn't discriminate. Like every kid is hearing the same messaging from that phone, from their peers, from strangers. Like they're all hearing it. And there's not one population that is exempt from this messaging that they could potentially be hearing.
Exactly. Spot on. And there are more vulnerabilities that make it more possible for a trafficker.
Like you said, the runaways, the foster kid, yes.
Or children living in a not safe or neglectful home. But there are children that are good from good homes that also experience this. So it knows no discrimination.
I wanted to let you know about my free editable starter scholarship spreadsheet to keep your high school students organized and motivated while pursuing financial aid for college. There's an entire tab dedicated to the undocumented student resources, as well as schools that meet 100% need for students. Students and counselors can stay organized with this spreadsheet and upcoming scholarship deadlines with the month-by-month tabs. If you already own this, head back and re-download it because it's been updated for this school year. Download your copy for free today by going to counselorclick.com/scholarship. Now, back to the show.
And so then the other side of that is there are different ways that male versus female are exploited or trafficked. And so when it comes to like sextortion, for example, this is a newer, again, not necessarily newer, but newly identified legally crime. It has recently gotten a lot of media coverage because there's two types of sextortion. There is sexual sextortion and there is financial sextortion. And the financial sextortion is targeting young males. And I think it was Officer Gomez I follow on Facebook. Somebody asked him, he was doing an interview and somebody asked him like, well, like, what can we do to help these males not click, like not send their nude image? And he's like, nothing. They're a teenage boy that just got sent a nude image of a girl that looks their age and said 71 back there. I'm like, okay.
Mm-hmm. Talk about that prefrontal cortex.
Right. That instinct, right? Males are males, right? And so they don't stand a chance, and it's just not fair, but that's reality. And, we can preach knowledge all day long, but we're really battling those instincts, right? And those hormones, right? It's just super hard to get past that. But what's happening is with the financial sextortion, as soon as that that young boy sends or young man sends his picture, immediately they're saying, send me X amount of dollars in iTunes cards or whatever, or I'm going to share this picture to your mom's work, to your school, to your church group, because they've done their research. They scouted this person's social media page. They know all about this child.
That's terrifying.
This young man can't think of his life moving forward like this. And so there was one case that I used as an example in my presentation from Michigan. I think it was within 20 minutes. I mean, it was so quick. He ended his life because he could just not think about his life moving forward if this happened. And so FBI is really taking this serious. Our local law enforcement is taking this very serious. So that's the financial side. And that financial side really does target those young males. The sexual side, from the research that I have seen and the cases that I have seen come across, I see that sexual side more targeting females. Not that that's not targeting males as well, because it does, but that financial side is mostly males. But that sexual side is mostly females. And that's more of like, it starts as those friendly relationships of, oh, I saw your post about, your parents just not getting you. My parents didn't get me either. And so building that relationship and that trust to the point where it's like, hey, you know what? Can you send me a shot of a picture of you? And it's fully clothed and it's innocent. And so they, talk some more. And it's like, hey, could you send me, a picture of you in your bathing suit? Again, like that's normal, right? Like half the TV and ads that we see on billboards and in magazines. Well, I don't think kids look at magazines anymore, but people are half dressed like that, right? So bathing suits, like, sure, it's covering everything. And then it's like, hey, send me a topless. And it gets to the point where this predator has so much control over this young girl that he makes them turn on their webcam as soon as they get home from school, and they have to stay in their room and they have to do everything in front of them, and they're always being watched, and they have to undress in front of them and they have to dress in front of them. And it's just like, I cannot imagine being that age and having that kind of pressure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And mom and dad all the while are at home with them and have no idea.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
So having counselors be aware of this and to have their eyes open to it, to make those interventions, to start those conversations, to talk with mom and dad. And, when it comes to familial trafficking or trafficking where you suspect that the abuse may be coming from home, whether you're thinking it's trafficking or not, it could just be sexual abuse, it could be trafficking, it could just be physical abuse or emotional abuse. Like, walk carefully. I know you're supposed to talk to the parents first, but if the parents, so when I come back to the familial trafficking, when I heard those survivors, I was wrecked for weeks, by the way, because I'm a call to action person. I was like, what do we need to do? How can we help you? And there was no answers. It's not an easy crime to fight, but what they did share was just what they wished somebody would have done in their life.
Tell us what they said about that.
And so the one thing they said most unanimously was just to ask more questions. But so many of them said that they would tell their teacher what was happening at home, and their teacher would tell mom and dad, hey, did you hear what so-and-so just told me? Can you believe that? And they're like, no, I can't believe that. That's crazy. Like, we'll definitely make sure they see a counselor and get some help. Like, obviously they have some stuff going on up there that like, they're just making this stuff up. And no.
Yeah. And I think that counselors are probably more aware of it than teachers in terms of like when they're reporting things. I feel like a teacher gets really nervous because they don't deal with it all the time. So their first instinct is like to call home. Whereas like we are calling DSS, we're making those reports and we understand that it's confidential, and you kind of can like put the pieces together. If they are saying it's something about mom or dad, like I'm not picking up the phone necessarily and calling them right there to confirm that, because I know that's not the safe place to go home to. And I'm kind of starting my investigation or, with that in mind.
Right. Right. And it's a careful balance to have because, mom and dad are the legal caretakers. They legally should be, notified. But that's one of those times that you would want to notify social services and parents at the same time and not let parents take the child home until everybody gets there. And so it gets scary in that regard when it comes to that internal trafficking, right? That familial trafficking or abuse in the home, because we don't want to make it worse for the child. And that's what they said. Like after they did share and were not believed, they were disciplined and punished very badly for that. And they never did it again. And it was just like, oh, my heart breaks so bad.
Right.
Because I know that there are children right now in our county that are experiencing this. And we don't know who they are. We don't know how to reach them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my favorite part of what I do. Like I mentioned, I cry a lot. I'm very emotional.
As anyone would be, I think, working in a position like this. And then especially if like you have a heart for this and you want to help
Right.
people and see people get out of this and be a survivor and not a victim.
Yes. And so like everybody's like, why do you still do it? How do you still do it? And you know, I know not all of your audience is going to be religious, but I am. And the only reason I get through this is because I do feel directly called by the Holy Spirit to do this. And I have wanted to quit so many times, and He has picked me up and just put me in those right positions that I'm like, you know what, I can't quit. And so I will say there are great moments that, you know, I'm out in the community with my family and somebody will come up and be like, Miss Krystal, did you teach at my school? And I'm like, no, I'm not a teacher. And they're like, oh, I thought you came in and talked about trafficking. I'm like, oh, no, I did.
Yeah.
But I have those moments, and that's what empowers me to keep going. And my hope is that by prevention, two things. One, I can be that person that comes in and says what you're dealing with is not okay. And there are resources to get out of that. And I'm here to help you and share those resources. So when you're ready, you can do that. And then two is our generation is too old to end this, right? It's so set in its ways. It's too far gone for our generation. But your generation can be the generation to eradicate this. Your generation can be the generation to be like, you know what? I was taught about those exploiters and those traffickers and those child predators. I'm not going to fall for those games on social media. I'm not going to let my friends fall for those games. I'm going to stop looking at porn because it is not a victimless crime. It fuels the demand for sex trafficking. 45% of people who were trafficked said that they had pornography made of them against their will. And so for my youth, they're like, oh, you know, they chose that lifestyle. Maybe some did. And often I've read stories where they did maybe choose that life and then often regretted it after. But 45% were forced to. And that just, you don't know who it is because they're all acting, right? And so you guys could be that generation that breaks that cycle, that stops feeding that demand that traffickers were like, I mean, I want to traffic somebody because it's good money, but there's nobody buying. So I guess I don't have a job.
So that's your pep talk that you're telling like high school age kids. It's like, you can be the one who ends this. If you are empowered, if you know how to say no, if you know the signs to look for too.
Yes. Yes, they are the generation that could unite to at least dampen it, you know. And like I said, it's been around since biblical times. I don't think it'll ever be eradicated because sin is in the world, evil's in the world, but we can diminish it, and their generation is the one to do that. So, you know, I think knowledge is power. Being aware of what it really looks like, having, you know, these conversations with youth, and letting them be aware, you know, if you catch a child viewing pornography, like talking about that side and how it leads to trafficking, how it normalizes exploitation and abuse, because that is not what loving relationships look like at all. That's not normal. And then identifying the true red flags of trafficking, having that knowledge, you'll just be in such a better place to empower yourself and your students to stay safe.
Totally. You've given us so many things to think about. And you have a lot of like, I mean, you don't have all the solutions, but you've got more solutions than the rest of us. Tell us like what we should do if we are suspicious of this happening with our students or in our school. Like, who do we call? Who do we involve? What resources are out there?
Yeah, there's so many resources. My first step would be NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. My second would be NCOSE, and they're so similar. I used to often get them confused, which is the National Center for Sexual Exploitation. And if you just Google those, the websites will come up. But they have just really great information. You know, NCMEC is going to be more specifically tailored to children, but they have information on trafficking, sextortion, runaway youth, all of that stuff. And then NCOSE is just a leader in constantly gaining new information, because this is not a crime that stays the same, which is also why it's so hard to catch and eradicate. It is evolving and changing. You know, when COVID was happening and everybody was, you know, freaking out, rightfully so, it was new and everybody, you know, was unsure. I was banned from Facebook a few times because I was all about the children and not about the virus. And I was like, who cares about this virus? It's not affecting children right now. But these children who are not kicked out of school, but are not able to go to school, child exploitation between March of 2020 to June of 2020 increased by 300%.
Wow.
Because we sent home in our county, what used to be third grade and up, you got to get a Chromebook if you had that internet talk by our internet safety guy, which is with Greenville County Police Department. And he'd come in all the schools and do his talk. When COVID hit, we sent everybody home with Chromebooks and no
internet safety talks anymore.
In the most stressful time of our generation, right? mom and dad were stressed. Me and my husband were like, it didn't affect us at all because we already work together at home. We're always here together anyways. But having mom, like we had to go through counseling when we first started working together because I was like, I can't leave you. Like, I don't get a break from you. Like,
right. And that's what everybody felt when they got sent home. Yeah.
everybody at the same time got that stress of being pushed in the same home, that the stress of the virus, the stress of being in the same home. And so what do children do when they get stressed? They detach, right? They go to social media. We also know that many children who engage in porn, the reason for going to porn is stress. It helps reduce stress, which it does, right? That dopamine release, that is supposed to be a very beautiful thing, but it's done in such a way that's not normal. So the body keeps craving more of it because it didn't satisfy the way it fully should have if it was a loving relationship between two consenting adults, right? And so that pornography use increased among youth. They kept turning to the internet. And then what do predators do? They're just sitting there, tapping their little fingertips together saying, ha 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 ha, come to me, children, because they could relate to all of these kids now that are stressed beyond reason, living in a home that's probably very stressed, or mom and dad are probably fighting a little bit more than usual because there's no breath, right? There's no breath away from anybody. That changed the face of exploitation and trafficking drastically for children. Not only did it put these devices in front of children, but we haven't stopped. That exploitation has stayed the same. It hadn't gone back down after COVID because trafficking evolved, right? These predators learn new ways. And so that exploitation is still so high online. It's sad but true. So
you go like to the NCMEC website, right? And like you can report right on there. And I remember going to a presentation about something similar to this at our national conference. It's called ASCA. And it was someone from NCMEC. And I remember thinking, wow, I thought this was like a very just like far away organization. You know what I mean? Like if I put my report in here, like maybe AI somewhere is going to read it. Like no, a person is reading that and starting an investigation when you put in, like it is taken seriously. So like that is somewhere that you should go directly if you have what you think might be a report to make.
Right. And if you're making reports, I'm a mandated reporter. You guys are mandated reporters. We have to, kind of follow whatever chain of command the school has, but you also have to report yourself. And I just want to emphasize that again, because some schools will say, I will take care of it. Okay, good. I'm going to take care of it too, because we're both legally responsible too.
Yeah.
And just make sure you guys are empowered to have that and know that, because you can't trust somebody else to do it. You can only trust yourself to do it. And I can hope other people will do it. And I give a lot of people like that benefit of the doubt, but I'm still going to do it just in case.
Yeah.
And so reporting it is going to be to law enforcement and social services, because we're dealing with underage individuals here, possibly involving the family. Well, you definitely will, but like at what point, right? Do we contact social services first because we think it might be within the home, or do we think it's outside of the home? And we need to make sure mom and dad get here today because they need to know that this child's being harassed online in their bedroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say NCOSI and NCMEC, even the FBI office, are going to be really great resources if you're like, I feel like I should report this, but I'm not really sure I have enough evidence yet.
Mm-hmm.
What else do I need? Honestly, you don't need anything. You just need a suspicion. And so that's enough to report. But then as far as how to follow up with that child and like what steps you need to take after that report, because you are still oftentimes seeing that individual, right? You're seeing that child. Those three websites, but mostly NCOSI and NCMEC, are going to be the best resources to helping you grow with this child to be better equipped to help them heal from this trauma. And so NCMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploiting Children, actually has support groups online for victims of sextortion, of trafficking, of sexual abuse. I just love that they're filling the gap. We even in where we are in Greenville, South Carolina, I'm from a small town just outside of the city. And I am a dog trainer by trade who does this voluntarily. I don't get paid for any of this. It's just where my heart is and my passion. And I have actually taught some of our smaller town precincts law enforcement officers about trafficking. And I'm like, I'm not qualified.
Well, but I hear you saying that to say like, we might not feel qualified to evaluate what this student is going through, but that doesn't mean we can't have eyes and ears to be watching and then connect them to the resources where they're going to get the help, where we're going to, this is what I tell students. It's like, I am going to make this report because I know that you're not safe, but somebody else will make the decision. They will take the facts, they will ask the questions. We are the connecting piece as the counselor. That happens in so many different things that we do. But in terms of student safety, this is a big part of what we're doing is getting the student to the right resources and letting those people make that decision too. They'll ask the questions, they'll interview the people, and we just get to be the connecting point. But if we're not, then who's going to do it?
Exactly. And I just share that to say that if you're in an area where your law enforcement does not take it as seriously as you expected, it's okay. There are other resources like NCMEC and the FBI field offices that are in your area, or that are maybe not in your area, but cover your area. They might be 3 hours away. They still cover your jurisdiction. You can reach out to those offices to make sure that this child is getting the care and the support that they need. And I'm in a lot of Facebook groups where, people will share things, and often they'll say, well, my child was a victim of sextortion and I reported it. And the law enforcement said that my child, if I move forward with this case, would be convicted of distribution of CSAM, child sexual abuse material, because they sent a nude image of themselves. I'm like, no. If your child sexts another child, they could be convicted of child distribution or distribution of child sexual abuse material. They could. Law enforcement doesn't want to make a child of
that's not the end goal, is to put that label on someone.
But sometimes they do have to put that fear into a school because it is so bad that, it does get shared and then it becomes a big problem. But if your child's a victim of a crime, it doesn't matter that your child shared that picture. Because right now, the most important thing is arresting that adult on the other end of the screen who willingly and knowingly took advantage of your child. Your child's innocent here, even though law enforcement threatened them. And so my response is always contact a lawyer, contact your FBI field office. They're going to make sure that your child's not going to be in trouble for this, and that the real predator is going to be punished for making your child a victim.
And I think that's so important for us to understand that as safe adults who are having conversations with kids, so that we can encourage them that exactly what you said before, so many of these instances are not being reported because they think it was my fault, or someone told me that this label is going to be slapped on me, or they feel like
I don't want to be in trouble.
Yeah. They feel like they're going to be in the wrong. And it's no. You need to be heard. Your voice needs to be heard, and we need to put an end to this.
Exactly. Or it's going to keep happening. And it has been increasing. And so I think it is the time to raise our voices, to speak loud and clear, and to advocate for our youth, because parents just aren't aware. And so when children try to talk to them about this, and like you mentioned, teachers aren't always as educated as you guys are on how to do trauma-informed questions and to be aware of it. And I think it just comes down to the reality of ignorance is bliss, right? If you don't know this kind of abuse and darkness is out there, when you hear about it, you're like, no, that wouldn't happen.
Right. Not in my school, in my town.
Not to my kid. And so it's really hard then to lift that veil and see reality. But if we can raise awareness in our schools, maybe hold little, teacher conferences to kind of hand out some pamphlets on trafficking and exploitation and say, hey, did you guys know? So that if a child was to disclose, the teacher's not going to be so caught off guard. They're going to be like, what?
Right.
That couldn't have happened to you. I'm sure you just misunderstood or overreacted. No, it did. And so we need to get up to date with the exposure that our children are seeing on a daily basis, so that we can be better prepared to help them when they do turn to us, instead of scaring them away and being like, nobody can help me because nobody gets this.
Right. Well, Krystal, this is incredible. You gave us so much good information. I think that people are going to leave with more knowledge. They're going to feel empowered that they can have these conversations and they know what to do with them. Or, if anything, if they've never even run into this, or they've never noticed that they're running into this, that their eyes would hopefully be opened, that when it does happen around them, or, on their caseload of students, that they're the person who is in their department with other counselors saying, hey, I heard something about this. This is what we go do about it now. So I really appreciate you spending your time sharing this with us, especially like you said, this is just a passion of yours and a place where it should be encouraging to all of us that you've gone and done all the research and you have looked into this. It's something you're passionate about. You're volunteering in your community with. It's they can do that too. There's encouragement that they can learn this stuff too. It's not new information, that they've probably heard some of this before, but This was super eye-opening, and I think it's going to be an incredible interview for people to listen to.
Thanks so much for having me, Lauren. And, I'm just glad to be able to share this here. And together, I know we can make a bigger difference.
Thank you, Krystal. Y'all, was that not incredible? I feel so empowered to know what to look for and what to do in this extremely sensitive situation. It's wild how prevalent it is, and I'd encourage you to go check out those resources that Krystal mentioned, like NCMEC and Narcosi, which I'll link in the show notes. At least check out those websites to see what resources are out there and familiarize yourself with what reporting looks like when it does happen in your school. Another challenge I'd have for you is to start a conversation with your school resource officer about any trends they're seeing in your school or in your community around sex trafficking. And then lastly, would you share this episode with another counselor who you think would benefit from hearing it? I know a lot of counselors use my podcast episodes as mini PD, like with their department. So what if you did that with this episode? Everyone listens on their own time and then comes back together to talk about this vulnerable population and how you can bring awareness to this issue in your school. I think we'd make a huge impact as high school counselors who are opening this conversation amongst each other and then shining light on it in our schools. So thanks for listening to this week's episode. It was a much needed conversation. I'm so glad we had it, and I hope you took away something new from it. I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of High School Counseling Conversations. All the links I talked about today can be found in the show notes and also at counselorclick.com/podcast. Be sure to hit follow wherever you listen to your podcast so that you never miss a new episode. Connect with me over on Instagram. Feel free to send me a DM at counselorclick. That's CLIQUE. I'll see you next week.